They didn't listen to the experts. They said, no, it's wrong, and we're going to fight for what's right. Why do I bring that up? A, I just have a blast today talking to people about the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned. So right there, it's about time, it's past time it was overturned. But secondly, I think that's a message that people need to know now. Because if any of you are masochists and you watch the national news, it's not good. If you look at Washington, if you have paid attention to what happened under COVID, it's pretty terrifying. There's a fight going on right now, and you know, I'm for low taxes, not high taxes, but it's not really about taxes. I'm for life, I'm against abortion, but it's really not about that. I'm for the Second Amendment, and well, clearly they're not trying to support the Second Amendment out in Congress. But I think there's a more fundamental battle that's going on right now. And it's a battle for who will run not only this country, but who will run your lives. I mean, I'll pick on Don Hinkle, good friend of mine, good Baptist. There were Baptist churches in Springfield, Missouri in 2020 that wanted to have their members drive to church, park in the parking lot with the doors locked, the windows up, and listen to the pastor on the radio. And the city of Springfield, Missouri, that bastion of liberalism, we're not talking New York, we're not talking California, Springfield, Missouri, said that is illegal. Now, you can be in line at the liquor store in your car, but you can't be in the parking lot at church to get together with other believers and worship as you see fit. That's what we're up against. And it's really a battle to determine whether or not this country of the people, this government of the people, by the people, and for the people will last. It's what Lincoln talked about in the Gettysburg Address. And you're going to get beaten down. The experts are going to tell you you're wrong. The incumbents and the establishment are going to tell you to go home. If you get elected, they're going to tell you to sit down. And I want to encourage you. That's what they said about the right to life. And tens of millions of children paid the price of that decision. We can't take that back. But going forward, because people didn't listen to the experts, because people stood on conscience and did what they knew was right. And some of those people that really led the way, they didn't survive to see today. But millions of children are going to grow up. And they're going to live and breathe in freedom because of the fight that was fought. And that fight will continue. And I want to encourage you, not just when it comes to life, but when it comes to this government and whether you were put here by God to serve the government, that's a no, or whether we, the people, created government to create a framework to allow us to make our own decision and choose how we would live and work to be as successful as God has given us the ability to be. That's the decision before us.
Right.
And it's important. I'm almost 50. I'll turn 49 in a couple of weeks. I'm okay. But what about my kids? And what about their kids? What we're fighting for is we're fighting to make sure that our children and our grandchildren don't ask why. Why did you give it up? Every one of us has had the opportunity to grow up and live and breathe in the greatest country on the face of the earth. Now, some of you know me, so you wouldn't necessarily agree that I've grown up. And we have a debt. We have a debt to pay to those that came before us. Because this country is not the way it was. I didn't grow up in it the way it was because of what I had done. I did it. I got to do it, and the environment was created by those that did the hard work of citizenship before me. So I want to encourage you to live your life with the understanding that you owe a debt to people you will never meet that died before you were ever born. But you can only pay that back, and you should pay that back, by being the active, involved citizens to make sure that the blessings of liberty and tranquility continue on for future generations. And it's more foundational than taxes. It's more foundational than the Second Amendment. It's more foundational than whether the Department of Education is constitutional. It's more foundational than the Federal Reserve. It's who shall serve who. Will we, the people, be the master? Or will we be a slave to government and to big business? That's the fight. And let me tell you, they'll lie to you and tell you it can't be won. It can be. All we need are people that are willing to stand. There are individuals in elected offices that will follow leaders that will lead in that direction. We don't have enough leaders. We've got, 39 days, I think it is now, maybe 38 until our August 2nd elections. Find those candidates that are on your ballot. Find what they believe in. Do they believe that the education establishment knows better how to educate your children, or do you believe that you should make that choice? Do they believe that the government can better use your funds, or you should have that money? Find those candidates. Get behind them. Because if you do, November is going to be wonderful. Is there anybody here that will admit that in November of 2016, when the results started coming in and we said, wait a minute, this isn't going quite the way the experts told us it would. Was I the only one that kind of turned over to CNN to see what was going on? I know I watched it several times the next day on YouTube. But do you remember that feeling when the numbers started coming in and there started to be a little bit of uncertainty in the announcers' voices that knew that she was going to be the president? I don't want to mention her name, if that's okay. And then as the numbers became more and more pronounced, they started to the mascara started to run. If we work and identify candidates that believe in individual freedom, this November will be even greater. And let me just tell you, individual freedom, it's not a political issue. It's a God thing. You go back to the Old Testament. It's written, I call heaven and earth this day to witness that I've set before you blessing and cursing, life and death. Choose life that you and thy seed might prosper. That's what we need to be about as people. Allowing individuals to exercise their free will. Because if God said that's what we should do, and God granted that, that's what will lead us to success. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. Are there any questions I can answer about government or anything? Yes?
What you going to do about cleaning up Missouri voter rolls?
We're working on it. We're not done with it. We have, I believe that House Bill 1878 will be signed in the next week or two. One of the really fun things in that is it allows the Secretary of State's office to audit local election authorities' voter rolls and allows us to withhold funds if they're not cleaning. Right now, now and in the future, the voter rolls, the only person that actually removes or adds voters is the local election authority. We can't force them to do either way. It actually took about 10 years to get Boone County on the statewide voter registration system. I think that happened in 2018. We could actually get rid of duplicates of people that had been in Boone County and somewhere else in the state. Once that law is signed, it will then go into effect on August 28th. Once that happens, we'll start figuring out what the process is for auditing voter rolls. And then not only will we start audits of the voter rolls, we can do limited audits now, but we don't have anything to back it up. All we can say is, hey, clean your rolls. But once we come up with a process for doing that, we will start auditing them, and if election authorities don't follow through, we have the authority to withhold funds. I think that will push them into gear. If it doesn't, we will go back, regardless of whether it does or not. We'll be going back to the legislature because we didn't get everything we wanted in the election bill this year. I would have loved it if instead of we just had voter verifiable paper ballots, we had hand-marked paper ballots. But that died in the Senate, and they just said as long as they're voter verifiable, that's fine. But if we're doing the audits and the clerks aren't doing what they're supposed to do, even with withhold funds, we'll look to the legislature to see if there's a bigger stick or another carrot that we can use to do that. It's really beneficial that the census recently happened because that helps us to do a better job of cleaning and gives us a better baseline to see where they ought to be. Not a perfect answer, but honest one. Yes, ma'am.
It's a quick follow-up to that.
Sure, go ahead. Yeah, if I didn't answer a question, ask me again.
No, it's okay. So I went to St. Charles County for, David Clemens was there a couple weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
But also the election commissioner for St. Charles County was there, or his assistant.
Mark Parkinson probably.
Yeah, the assistant. So I was just questioning him afterwards, and he said, well, we moved voters to an inactive status, but because there's a federal law that says we can't remove them for 4 federal election cycles, we can't remove them.
I think it's 2 federal elections.
Whatever. That's ridiculous. Is that really a federal law? Because what if somebody hacks into the system and votes in for that person as a ghost voter, and then that reactivates them?
Under federal law, they cannot remove them from the rolls for lack of participation solely. After 2 federal elections where they haven't participated, they can use that as an indicator and then send out a mailer to verify whether or not they still live at that address. But there is a federal law that is preclusive to. Now, if it doesn't preclude them if, say, someone says, hey, I've moved. It doesn't preclude them when we get reports through Eric that this individual appears to have moved and registered to vote in Kansas. We send that information to that local election authority to see if that is the same person. If it is, then we can remove them. But we can't remove someone just for failure to vote. I don't know that I answered it, so please push me if I didn't quite. This gentleman has his hand up first.
We're not hearing you in the back.
Oh. Yes, sir.
So my question concerns it. As we all know, it should be a great deal that Roe v. Wade got overturned this morning. But
It is a great deal.
what are the plans to? Are there any plans for taking care of alternate access to birth control, such as just Plan B or any other contraceptives?
I don't think it's fully known what the legislature is going to do. If I had to guess, I think you're going to see real movement to see what we can do to reduce chemical abortions and the mail order of chemicals to do in-home abortions, which are, well, I mean, every abortion, one person dies, but with chemical abortions, there is a greater risk for the woman also.
Right.
I think you'll see that. That's the biggest one that I know of from my talks. I don't know what kind of the next level after that is. There are a lot of different thoughts, but that's the biggest one I think that they'll go after there.
All right. And just a quick follow-up. In some cases, Planned Parenthood is converted from doing abortions there to consulting women on how they can get them to states where abortion would be legal.
Yeah, they're pushing women just across the Missouri line. There are 2 major clinics they've built. That is exactly what they've been doing in St. Louis.
Are there any plans to tackle that, or?
I don't know. I would say that it's clear to legislators and others that that's a problem. I'm not sure that there's a clear legislative solution to that matter. Well, you all probably know our legislatures refused to defund Planned Parenthood. Now, they will tell you they defunded Planned Parenthood. What they did was, a couple of years ago, they put in the budget that Planned Parenthood wasn't supposed to get any money. There was a big lawsuit and trial and Supreme Court case, and the Supreme Court said, look, if you want to do that, you're not allowed to put that in the budget. You have to actually put that in statute. These monies cannot go to Planned Parenthood. You will probably hear some of our state senators saying that they defunded Planned Parenthood this year. Once again, they removed the money from the budget for Planned Parenthood, which they know is ineffective. When they had the opportunity on the FRA to actually put it into statute the way the Supreme Court said they needed to do it, they refused.
Why we need two senators.
There's a gentleman on the fourth table back there. You had your hand up.
Yeah. Back to voting integrity. Dominion machines. Some of us a couple weeks ago you explained there have been problems with those.
Heck of a lot of concerns. Yes.
Yes, and you explained that publicly.
Well, are you talking about there was CISA put out a vulnerability disclosure? Is that what you're talking about, or is there something else?
I can't remember, but I read your response to voting machine problem, to all of our integrity, and part of that was about Dominion machines.
Yes.
And many people were not very satisfied with that. Can you talk to us about those machines, that type of voting, and what you think needs to be done and whether you can do it or not?
Yeah, that was why. Well, where to start? There was a lawsuit down in Georgia. There's been a continuing multiple lawsuits about the equipment that was used. They use Dominion equipment with some certain software. There was an investigator, and I'm not quite going to pronounce his name correctly. It's like Halderman out of Michigan. As part of the court case, he was given access to the Dominion equipment, took it back to his laboratory. I think he works for one of the universities, but I don't know which one, so don't quote me on that one. And he investigated it for several days and came back and said, these are potential vulnerabilities in this equipment due to this software. The vulnerabilities that he disclosed require someone to have direct physical access over a prolonged period of time to set it up. So we do have rules and procedures that are designed to stop that from happening. That's not perfect, though. What we tried to do with the legislation that we pushed forth the last 2 years, and our legislation passed this year, but it got amended. What I had suggested was we just go to hand-marked paper ballots. We haven't been able to replicate any problems that have supposedly been associated with Dominion equipment, but that's proving a negative is hard to do. And what we thought was, let's just move away from electronic equipment because, truth be told, Dominion, ES&S, Hart InterCivic, any sort of electronic equipment, if you can take it to your lab for 2 weeks and use whatever equipment on it, you can mess it up. So what we wanted to move to hand-marked paper ballots, except for people that need accessible equipment. Because we do have voters that they can't hand-mark a paper ballot, but intellectually they're still all there. So they're of age, they're citizens, they're residents. They still have the right to vote. We have to make it possible for them to do that. Unfortunately, in the bill that was passed, the legislature still wanted to allow the ballot marking devices for anyone that wants to use it. It does outlaw the DREs, and we are exploring what we can do with regard to the certification process for ballot marking devices, because at the very least, we'd like to have ballot marking devices. If we can't get the law changed where it's all hand marked, we'd like ballot marking devices where it's the tabulation is based on human readable data. And by that I mean we'd like it so it's just the plain language that you read is also what the tabulator uses to pick who wins. We didn't get that through. I do think we're better off than we were. So that's still a process. What I will say though is they looked at the different Dominion equipment and the Dominion software. And of the variants of the Dominion equipment and the Dominion software that they said, well, with the right amount of physical time and know-how, you could exploit these. There's only one of those machines in the state of Missouri, and it's generally used for one vote every election. And it's for an individual that needs the accessible. So that's not a perfect answer, but it does mean that we were able to go back and at least verify that none of the elections that equipment was used in had any elections that were within 1 or 2 votes. But that's making it work. And if we just went to hand-marked paper ballots, we don't have to worry about it at all.
Well, here's a simple question.
Yes, sir.
Are you happy with voting in St. Louis and Kansas City? Are you happy with the way those elections are being conducted as the Secretary of State?
You had to go to St. Louis, didn't you? You couldn't ask me about Bowling Green. There have been things that we didn't like about it. There was a municipal election earlier this year where under the ordinance they weren't supposed to put the political party affiliation, and yet on the ballot they put that anyway. We feel like that's not following the law, and that could be used to push things one way or the other. In 2020, the League of Women Voters went into St. Louis and they helped, quote, cure ballots, which should mean that they went in and said, are there any ballots where we need to call the voters because there's something missing on the ballot? But they just did it in St. Louis. They didn't do it statewide, so I think there was an equal protection problem.
Right.
And then, from what I'm told, they said, we just want to do this in certain precincts. Now, if you're just trying to be a good citizen and help out, don't you kind of say, dump them all in a pile, and we'll just take them randomly off the top of that? So, there have been concerns. Happy to say that the legislation that was passed that I expect to be signed in the next week or two does forbid the curing of ballots, because we don't think someone else should be touching your ballot after your vote unless it's part of an audit or it's part of some sort of judicial determination. But I do not have any evidence that leads me to believe that elections have been changed by malfeasance like that. But I also think that things haven't always been done exactly the way they should be done. And that's probably not as simple an answer as you wanted, but I tried to be very open with it.
You've got the name and the position, and we would encourage you to, in voting propriety in this state, we would encourage you to lead the way and be loud and make sure that Missouri leads the country in that kind of thing, because some people are discouraged that we're even going to get decent elections this year.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And we should not let that happen in this state. And whatever it takes, you're the guy.
Well, I try to be that guy, but I have no authority over boards of elections. Boards of election are appointed by the governor. I have no authority over the election authorities. I'm hoping to get some authority. Well, when the law gets signed, I'll have the ability to withhold funds on voter registration and auditing those. I'll have the ability to force them to allow us to do cybersecurity audits of their offices. And you know what? I'd really appreciate your thoughts on what more we could be doing, because I'm not going to think of everything. One of the things that I could really use your help with, and one of the, I hate to bring it up, but I got to be honest with you, there's one really big thing that was missing from our elections bill this year. What's one of the number one things we ought to do with our elections? Anybody want to shout out to you? No, you make it a national holiday. You know what happens?
Nobody shows up to go to.
People take Monday off from work. Everybody's taking 4-day weekends, and I can't get poll workers. I got to have poll workers. That's one of the best lines of defenses for our elections, is having people you know that your kids played sports with, that you worship with, you name it, that are actually running elections, not some unknown consortium or something. What else do we need in elections? Nobody here from Arizona?
Audits?
Audits. One thing that we really didn't get in the election bill this year was how do we appropriately audit our elections?
There's a lot of us who would volunteer. A lot of us would volunteer.
I'm not against, please, your help is needed. And you know where your help is needed on that? On figuring out how you would do an audit. I think there was agreement enough that it would have passed, but the problem was getting agreement on how you do it. And let me explain. Do you do a major audit every 2 years? Do you do a major audit every 6 years with every 2 years a minor audit? How do you decide what to audit? Who decides? Does the Secretary of State? Could be his fault if you have a problem. Is it the legislature? How often can you do it? That's the sort of thing that people that are interested could really help. I talked to a lot of legislators about it, and a lot of them said they were for audits, but they weren't comfortable that we had a good way to do that. How do we involve the Secretary of State, but at the same time say, hey, it could have been that guy's fault, so we don't want them in charge? How do we have the legislature maybe be a trigger for it? How do we make sure there's money that's available for an audit? So if we want to bring in a third party, how do we decide the qualifications of the third party? That is something that I would love to see us be able to get. I would have liked to have seen it get done this year. At the end, I was trying to just get language that specifically spelled out that the legislature had the authority to do an audit. There's some belief, I tend to think, that the legislature can do an audit right now if they want to over their supervisory powers and because they control the budget and they have to have oversight. But I think it'd be really good because you all care. You're informed, you want to be involved. What you could really help with is help come up with a framework that could be put into legislative language for how to do audits, because that didn't make it this year, and it's partially my fault because I felt like I had a choice. I could either work and get audits, or I could work and get photo ID, security requirements, auditing of the voter rolls, all those sorts of things. And I thought I was only going to get one, and there were times this year I didn't think I was going to get anything out of the legislature, unfortunately. So I said, I'd rather do something moving forward if I can get either something that looks back and tells me whether we're screwed up or not, or something that changes our policy and our procedures so that we're better off. I'd rather do that, but it would have been nice to get both of them. And I would welcome your help in figuring out how to do that, because that, I think, was the biggest impediment to getting it done in the legislature, was how do we figure out what the triggers are. We can't do what the National Association of Secretaries of State wanted. They wanted to pass a resolution that would say you have to outline exactly what you're going to look at and how you're going to do an audit before the election ever occurs. We've got to have a framework, but we've also got to have language in there that says, look, if something weird happens, you've got to be able to investigate that, even though you never would have assumed that would happen. And that, by the way, is why I'm no longer a member now. Who else has?
The majority of the legislative districts.
A concurrent majority. Ron Calzone and I have talked about that a lot. I think that'd be far better than where we are. I don't think you ought to change the Constitution willy-nilly. The Missouri Constitution is 10 times longer than the federal Constitution.
Agreed.
All of you that voted in 2018, you voted on how long someone needed to be a member of a fraternal organization before they could hand out bingo cards. You changed it from 2 years to 6 months. Now, I don't know what the length ought to be, but I cannot be the only person that thinks it's asinine that the length of time you have to be a member of the Lions Club to hand out bingo cards is in the Missouri Constitution.
Back to the Ron Calzone method, don't you agree that that would be a more representation of Missouri because it would keep Kansas City and St. Louis from dominating the election then? They're the ones that always.
So I think it'd be better than where we are.
Because
Well,
people
maybe
don't have
better, but is it
confidence.
better than the proposal you're saying of say 67%?
I guess what I'll say is this. I'm not going to get to make the final determination on what the legislature decides on. So right now I am trying to encourage them along any of those lines to move forward. And whichever one they pick, I would be happy to support. But I don't want to be denigrating one that is better than where we are now. That could be the one they end up putting on the ballot, and then people use my words to stop something that would improve our state. I'm going to take what I can get, but I will always exhort for more. And
I have a question. So, I understand that every 20 years,
yes,
yes, there is a question that's supposed to go on the ballot
the November ballot, yes.
about rewriting the Constitution.
Whether or not we should have a constitutional convention.
Correct. Isn't that coming up this year?
Yes. In the November general election, you will vote as to whether or not Missouri should have a constitutional convention. That is every 20 years. Isn't it wonderful? Some of you know this, some of you don't, most of you probably don't care. But Paul and I ran against each other. He ran for Secretary of State, or I ran against him, how do you want to put it?
Yeah. That's what happens.
Isn't it great to have good conservative people that can like each other and have minor disagreements, but say, look, we need to move further to the right. And he doesn't agree with everything, but I think on the major issues, we're pretty close.
Yeah, I invited you to join the Constitution Party.
And I reciprocated. And I asked you to drag the Republican Party closer to the Constitution Party.
We're working on it.
That's what we need. And please, before you vote on whether or not we should have a constitutional convention, look at how the delegates are chosen. All too often, good citizenship takes work. It's hard work. But look at how those delegates are chosen. That may have a bearing one way or the other on how you vote.
So, I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
So the only question is whether or not to have a convention, not how the delegates are chosen.
Yes. The question is, do you want to have? And there are rules already for how those delegates would be, which some people find concerning. It may be, you could end up, I'm not an expert on it, and it's been a while since I've looked at it, but it seemed to me you could end up with a group of delegates that was, had far more leftists on it than the state as a whole would elect either statewide or to legislative districts.
So there are already rules for that.
There are rules for how the delegates, and they're not always clear. And I don't think it's ever been utilized. So there's never been litigated and actually gone through the process. Because our Constitution isn't that old, 45.
Sure.
From 1945, not 45 years old.
Can those rules be changed by the legislature?
Those rules, I believe, are in the Constitution.
Okay.
So it would have to be by vote of the people.
Thank you.
And I wouldn't really trust the legislature anyway.
For the record, you are not a member of the National Association of Secretary of States. Is
No,
that-
I'm not. They held secret meetings that were against their bylaws, and in those secret meetings they tried to essentially come up with a resolution that would say that states should only be able to do audits in a certain way, and I disagreed with how they wanted to do the audits, and then I disagreed with the fact that they would be trying to promulgate rules that would be used by states across the country for how to run elections, and they did it in secret and didn't tell people like they were supposed to. So I left. It didn't save me a whole lot of money, but it saved the state a couple $1,000 a year, I think.
It's the principle.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't have to go to Washington D.C. every winter time, and I enjoy staying here. Yes, ma'am. Sorry, you've been so pleasant back there, just holding up nice. You weren't waving it or anything. I almost missed you.
No, I was just going to say a note on the constitutional revision.
Yes.
You're right. Our constitution was rewritten in 45 or whatever because it was rewritten. That's the last time we had one. But if anybody's interested, look up on the Show Me Institute site, constitutional revision, or those words on there, and you'll probably find some things because they did kind of a series of things on this a few years ago. Really interesting, but you're right, there's risk to it.
Yeah. You all tired of me? Oh, if you around me long enough, I'll do something you don't like. That's the problem with principled people. They'll irritate you.
Is that all? Anybody? Somebody has a burning question, surely.
I see someone that probably has a question about where I stand on red flag laws.
Oh, that's a good
How do you
one.
do a red flag laws, Jay?
I don't stand for them. I think they're unconstitutional. Look, if I can take the right of the news media away to say what they want to say when they commit a misdemeanor, maybe we can discuss it. The idea that the Second Amendment is a second-class right is wrong. The Second Amendment is very clear. The right of the people to bear arms shall not be infringed. It doesn't say can only be kind of infringed. It doesn't say as long as 5 black-robed dictators in Washington, D.C. think it's okay, they can do it. And that's what I really loved about the decision that came out about the New York law about giving out concealed carry licenses. Right at the top, and one of the main points that was made in it is you have to treat the Second Amendment the way you treat the First Amendment. You have to treat it the way you treat the Sixth Amendment. It's a constitutional amendment. If you don't like it, amend the Constitution. It's really easy, except you're trying to do something stupid, so it won't go through. And it's really disappointing to me that we saw, frankly, some of our, I believe at least one of our senators voted for a, quote, gun law, which will do nothing to stop school shootings or things like that. It will just spend more money we don't have. It will enlarge the Justice Department, which I think we can all see over the last couple of years has not been the Justice Department that we could believe in 30 years ago. It's just enlarging the federal government. And you know what's going to happen? There's going to be another mass shooting. There's going to be several more. I don't like that. That's a terrible thing. And you know what they're going to do? Well, we did this last time, and it didn't work, so now we need to go further.
That's right.
And we need to elect people with the spine to stand up and say no. If you want to amend the Constitution, get it through Congress, see if the states will ratify it. But that was another great decision of the court to say no. The Second Amendment is just as strong an amendment as the rest. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for letting me talk. Happy to stick around and talk to you individually.